Welcome, everybody, to Sports Fluent Fantasy Live. I'm your host, Anthony K. So, this week we're going to go through some starts and sits for the week, as well as some sleepers, and a new segment called Boom or Bust. So, these are players that literally could go either way with a huge game or a bust, and I'll tell you why in both directions. We're going to start the week off with going through some of your questions from last week and how those resulted from our answers, and then answer this week's questions as well. So last week, we're going to start there. We had, the first question was the Tampa offense. Will it look like the New England offense with the 3 backs, 2 tight ends, et cetera, with all the weapons? So week 1, it didn't look that great, but we warned you about that. In fact, we predicted that the Bucs would get blown out by the Saints because Tom Brady and his receivers and tight ends hadn't had the time to really go through and kind of get that cohesion, work together in a full speed against other teams, right? This is where the preseason actually would have helped when you have a new quarterback coming in and working with some new receivers. So is it going to look a little bit more like the Patriots offense down the road? Yeah, probably. I wouldn't give up on the Bucs so quickly. I also wouldn't go heavy on any one of their players from a fantasy perspective, because every week it's going to be different. You're going to have Mike Evans is going to bounce back. He's going to have a big week. You're going to have Chris Godwin having a big week. I wouldn't say Gronk. Don't kind of put your money in on Gronk from a tight end perspective, because I think OJ Howard, I think, is one that you should look for kind of down the road as the person who's going to kind of take over that role that maybe Gronk had in the Patriots offense. Let's see. The next question that we looked at last week, who do I like, Drew Lock or Joe Burrow? I told you I liked Burrow. I told you because their team's going to be down. They're going to throw a lot. And he showed some good composure in week 1. And I think he's going to be, from a fantasy perspective, the Bengals aren't going to win a lot of games. But from a fantasy perspective, I think Joe Burrow can be that kind of streamer quarterback. So if your quarterback's on a bye or you have an injury down the road that comes up. So he's a good guy. I have him on a couple of my teams kind of buried. I have some of my leagues have deeper benches, so I have him kind of buried at the bottom of my bench, and I can use him if needed. The last question from last week, Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard? I told you I was high on Slayton, and he delivered this week. And I think moving forward, you're going to see the Giants, now that we've kind of seen a little taste of what Joe Judge and that team's going to try to do, they're going to try to throw the ball. They had a really hard time running the ball, and that's going to be a problem for Saquon Barkley owners. He's not on my list of actually trade candidates, but maybe I'll give you a bonus one, because that's another thing we're going to talk about today. But Saquon Barkley is another one that maybe, if someone sees value in Barkley in terms of his potential, that he might be a sell high, see what you can get back for Barkley on the trade market and for your fantasy teams. But back to Slayton and Sterling Shepard, I think they're both going to have value in fantasy. I think, again, the Giants are going to be losing a lot of games. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot. Sterling Shepard is the better real-life receiver, I think. He runs better routes. He's a better pass catcher. But I think from a fantasy perspective, I think they're pretty equal. I'd give the edge, however, to Slayton. So to this week, we're going to jump right in to the starts and sits. We're going to start at quarterback, and we're going to go with your start, Dak Prescott. So he didn't look great in week 1. However, he's got a good matchup against Atlanta this week. And Dallas and Dak, for that matter, kind of share the same personality where they don't look good. You kind of start to want to write them off and say, Cowboys are going to stink. And then he's going to go for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns this week, and just kind of go, just right back onto your radar and look really good. I think Washington was the only team that won in that division in week 1. So you're going to see a bounce back from Dak. They're not going up against a really solid defense when it comes to the passing game. So look for Dak to really have a nice bounce back game this week against the Atlanta Falcons. Start him with confidence. The next one, my starting quarterback, so I'm definitely going to start him, is Josh Allen of the Bills, right? Josh Allen is the same type of quarterback that he was last year, where he might not do everything you want in terms of passing touchdowns, but he will get you some yards on the ground and probably a rushing touchdown as well. So from a fantasy perspective, go with Josh Allen. He's a good start this week against Miami, who, right, didn't look that good against Cam Newton. So not to compare Josh Allen to Cam Newton, but they both kind of running quarterbacks. I think Allen at this point in their career probably throws the ball a little bit better. Cam still looked a little bit rusty in week 1. So look for Josh Allen to have a big game this week against Atlanta. Then to your sits, well, I just mentioned him, right? Cam Newton versus Seattle in Seattle. Now this, look, it's not the same Seattle defense of the past. However, I think you're going to see that rust still from Cam Newton. They're not going to let him get out and run, I think, as much as the Dolphins did. So look for Cam to have one of those, wow, he's great. Oh, he's kind of terrible games this week. So I would sit Cam Newton if you can. The next one is going to be Drew Lock. So Drew Lock is someone who I think down the road may develop into a better fantasy quarterback. But this week against Pittsburgh's defense, I don't think we even saw how good Pittsburgh's defense is going to be in week 1. They're going to play a really good game this week at Denver, and I'd stay away from kind of anyone on that Denver team if you can against Pittsburgh's defense this week. Sleepers. This is one. It's one that I've been telling you guys about, and he didn't look great. They passed for some yards, but he didn't look great in week 1. But I'm telling you, this Colts offense is going to pick it up. I promise you. They're going to throw for a lot of yards. They're going to throw for a lot of touchdowns. And Phillip Rivers is your sleeper pick this week against Minnesota, who gave up a big game, obviously, in week 1. He's going to take advantage of that. I think you're going to see them throw the ball more. So look for the Colts, right? They're a little light now at running back. Look for the Colts to have a really big game. And then our boomer bust. So let me tell you what boomer bust is. Boomer bust is this player is either going to have a huge game or a terrible game. And so it's obviously be very cautious of this guy, because it's the same thing that happened in week 1, where for the first 3 quarters, he looked horrible. And then in the 4th quarter, everyone was like, oh, this is the second coming. This is my new fantasy quarterback. I'm picking up Mitch Trubisky of the Bears. Be afraid. Be very afraid of Mitch Trubisky, because he's that guy who's going to throw a couple interceptions in the first 3 quarters and look terrible, and maybe pick it up in the 4th quarter, or I'll just have a complete stinker of a game. So be forewarned about Mitch Trubisky. To the running backs. So our start this week is going to be one that is different than what the waiver wire is telling you. So when Marlon Mack got hurt, you're going to hear a lot about the Colts this week. When Marlon Mack got hurt for the season, everyone kind of started to pick up Hines, and they were like, okay, Hines is the guy. And he's still a waiver wire pickup. You should pick him up. But Jonathan Taylor is going to be the one, I think, that reaps the rewards, and look for him to have a big game as well against Minnesota this week. The other start, and this is one where be careful with this one. We're going to talk about him a little bit later in our Who to Trade segment. Adrian Peterson. So Adrian Peterson looks at like maybe not the Adrian Peterson of old, but he doesn't look like old man Adrian Peterson. So look for Adrian Peterson as a start this week against the Green Bay Packers. Our sits this week are Chris Carson against the Pats. So the Pats defense is going to stuff him this week. And Chris Carson has been that type of player as well, where good week, bad week, kind of very inconsistent. So look for Chris Carson as a sit this week against the Patriots. Moving to Frank Gore is my next sit against the 49ers. I'm not starting anybody against that 49ers defense if I can, especially Frank Gore in that Jets offense. They just look terrible, right? Le'Veon Bell is hurt, obviously, now, so Gore's going to step in and take over, but I just stay away from that if you can. Sleeper pick. So this is one that we told you about kind of heading into the season, that although all the talk in Cleveland was about kind of the two-headed monster of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, one of them was going to kind of take over. I like Chubb. I like Chubb a lot, but I think Kareem Hunt is still the better running back, and look for Kareem Hunt to get the majority of touches this week. So he's your kind of sleeper pick against those Cincinnati Bengals, where they're going to probably be leading in the game, and they're going to run the ball quite a bit. And I think Kareem Hunt is also better out of the backfield as a receiver. So look for Kareem Hunt as your sleeper for this week. To the boom or bust. Same game, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Joe Mixon. Everyone's waiting for Joe Mixon to kind of have this boom and kind of explosion and really take off. Hasn't happened yet. He had a couple of nice games at the tail end of last season, and it seems like, when there's really nothing to play for, he picks it up. So be careful of Joe Mixon. Some of you drafted him pretty early, so you're going to want to play him, but just be careful. Again, against that Cleveland defense, it could be one of those big, huge games, but I wouldn't put my money on it. Okay, so we'll jump now to one of your questions, and then we'll get back to the stardom sit-ems. So the question is Josh Jacobs the real deal? Josh Jacobs is 100% the real deal. You're going to be kicking yourselves later on in the season if you didn't pick up Josh Jacobs. Next season, you're going to wonder why he wasn't an early first-round pick like he probably should have been this year. I've actually traded for him in one of my leagues. I think Josh Jacobs is going to have a big season. And I think, I've told you before, I think the Raiders are in the hunt for a wild card this year, and Josh Jacobs is going to be a huge part of that. I really like what I see in the Las Vegas offense from Josh Jacobs. Another question, Malcolm Brown or Austin Eckler? I'm worried about Kelly taking into Eckler's touches. Yeah, that's something you should be worried about. However, this one's going to depend on what kind of league you're in. So Austin Eckler, although he didn't get a lot of receiving opportunities in week 1, he's still the better running back out of the backfield as a receiver. So if you're in a PPR league or a half PPR league, Austin Eckler still for sure is going to be the guy over Malcolm Brown. Keep in mind, Malcolm Brown had a big week 1 last year too. 2 touchdowns, a lot of yards, the same thing that he did this year. That Rams backfield is going to be messy with Brown, Henderson returning soon. They're going to want to get Cam Akers his touches, although he didn't look very good, didn't get a lot of touches in week 1. He is a very good running back. So down the road, when you're heading into kind of the middle of the fantasy season, Cam Akers is going to be the one probably getting the majority of those touches. So look for Cam Akers out of that backfield down the road. But I would still go Eckler over Brown in that scenario. Okay, back to our starts and sits at the wide receiver position. And you know what? This actually ties into one of the questions here. So I have worried about Allen Robinson and all the drama in Chicago. Okay, so I'm bringing that up because he is a start this week against that Giants defense. Here's what that drama is going to do. They're going to target him this week. The Bears, let me say this. I'm going to stop timeout here for everything else. Chicago Bears, if anyone's listening, sign Allen Robinson to an extension. Extend A-Rob. Do it now. But I also think Mitch Trubisky understands he's his best wide receiver, right? We know that Anthony Miller is good. He's obviously got a couple of options at tight end. But A-Rob is still by far the number 1 receiver in Chicago, and they're going to target him, I think, early and often this week. So whether it's PPR or standard league, look for Allen Robinson to have a huge game against that Giants defense. And to the question, should you be worried about it? Only if you're playing him. Only if you're playing against Allen Robinson would I be worried in fantasy this week, because he's going to have a huge game. My next start, same division actually, we're going to go with Adam Thielen. So as much as I think the Colts are going to get a lot of fantasy points, put up a lot of yards passing, I also think they're going to give them up as well. So look for Adam Thielen. Now with Stephon Diggs off to Buffalo, Adam Thielen showed us in week 1 he can be a number 1 receiver, or he is a number 1 wide receiver. And I think against that Colts defense this week, he's a definite start. To the sits. So this is one that's going to be weird because he had a great week 1, and I think he's someone you want on your team moving forward in fantasy. But Jamison Crowder is a sit this week because he's playing against the 49ers defense. Much like Frank Gore, and not that anyone's starting anyone from the Jets offense, but just stay away from the Jets offense, especially this week against the 49ers. So sit. Although you probably picked them up, and I'm going to talk about him here in a minute again, in terms of trade targets, stay away from Jameson. The other one is Brandon Cooks. going up against, again, the Ravens defense looks great. He didn't look even very good in the first week against Kansas City. Houston's passing game, I think, is still trying to figure itself out, but this is not the week to start Brandon Cooks. If you have him on your team, maybe see if you can bench him for the next couple of weeks, actually. Next one, so they're a sleeper. So this goes back to my start with Dak Prescott. I think we're going to see a big game out of CeeDee Lamb. The Falcons will give up a lot of passing yards to Dallas. I think Dallas is going to be very committed to the pass. And I think you're going to see, it's going to be one of those games that's going to make you think twice about CeeDee Lamb. Like, what do I do with Amari Cooper now? Like, it's going to be a big game, I think, for CeeDee Lamb because their attention is going to be obviously on Amari Cooper and maybe even Michael Gallup, who's probably also a start. But look for CeeDee Lamb as a definite sleeper this week against the Falcons. And then my boomer bust. This is tough for me because I wanted, for the last maybe 2 or 3 years, I've actually had him on my fantasy team and he's done right by me. However, this is fantasy and Keenan Allen has got to stay away from this week because he's either going to have a huge game, right, against the Chiefs secondary, or he's going to do the same thing he did last week. Just kind of, he seemed to disappear a little bit last week. So I also am not a big fan of their quarterback. So, his ability to get the ball to Keenan Allen as well. So I'd stay away from Keenan Allen this week. But having said that, he's one of those players where you write him off and he goes for a big game. So be careful with Keenan Allen if you have him on your roster. Let's go. Let's do a couple more questions here because we got a couple more coming in. Let's see. Darius Slayton, Robbie Anderson, or Marvin Jones. Who should I play this week? Well, if you can only pick one, again, depending on if you're PPR or standard league, I'd stay away from Slayton against the Bears defense. I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on Daniel Jones when they see a young quarterback. So I don't think he's going to have a lot of time to throw. So I'd kind of stay away from Slayton this week. And then Anderson or Marvin Jones. Probably going to lean to more Robbie Anderson against the Bucs defense versus Marvin Jones. Although with if Kenny Golladay is still out, then I would probably flip-flop and then go with Jones against the Packers defense. So keep in mind what happens with Kenny Golladay, and that'll make your decision there. Next one, Big Ben. Will he be consistent in fantasy? Okay. Ben Roethlisberger has actually, I don't think he's ever been consistent in fantasy. That's always been the problem with Ben Roethlisberger in fantasy, is that he'll have these big games, right, where he throws for a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns, and then he'll go on the road and give you a stinker. He's kind of like Drew Brees that way in fantasy. So, no, I don't think he's going to be consistent this year. I also think coming off an injury, even though he looked good, not great in week one, there's still going to be that kind of, there's going to be some rust. He knows his receivers pretty much, but I don't think he's going to have a huge game this week. However, I would pick up, because I'm going to get to him next, is Eric Ebron as a tight end, because I think he's the one guy who'll actually get some touches this week against that Broncos defense. So we'll just jump right to that. Tight end, start Eric Ebron. The other tight end would be Tyler Higbee against the Eagles defense. Eagles look like two different teams, from being up on Washington to then obviously not scoring another point and losing against Washington, which was pretty disappointing. However, look for Tyler Higbee to have a big game against the Eagles. Your sits. Pains me to say this, right? Pains me to say this because it's about my Bears, but Jimmy Graham against the Giants is a sit. I know he had a good week one, he caught a touchdown, but they are going to target, like I said, Allen Robinson quite a bit, especially I think in the red zone. So that's going to take away from Jimmy Graham's opportunities. I also think they're going to try to start getting Cole Kmet into the game a little bit more as well. The rookie out of Notre Dame he's like a young Jimmy Graham. And that's actually what Jimmy Graham said about him. So, that takes away from his value. He's not going to be kind of a consistent tight end. And it's tough after the top kind of 2 or 3 tight ends in the league. You're kind of streaming tight ends after that. There's not many you can really definitely depend on. The next sit is going to be Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins. I know I was high on him in terms of his sleeper value, but that was for the season, right? I think he's going to have a good overall season for the Dolphins, but he's just not a big play this week against the Bills, who defend the tight end position very well. Our sleeper for this week. So we talked about that Bucks offense and how they're going to pass the ball around. I think OJ Howard is the one that's going to reap the rewards of having Tom Brady. Tom Brady is definitely someone who I think we know with Rob Gronkowski had a good relationship and throws the ball to his tight ends quite a bit. So I think OJ Howard is the one that's going to reap the most of the rewards from there. And then the boomer bust. So this one's interesting because I was really high on Noah Fant, and he delivered in week 1. But this week he's got a big matchup against the Steelers. So be careful with Noah Fant because he's, again, kind of boomer bust this week. But I'd shy away from Noah Fant against the Steelers defense. One more question here. Lazard or Marvin Jones? Oh, another Marvin Jones question. Randy, is it PPR or standard league? Let me know, and then I'll get back to you on that answer. And then, okay, so to our waiver wire targets. So that's it for sits and sleepers. We'll post those online as well if you need to keep them for later on. So with the waiver wire targets, doing this obviously Wednesday night, you've probably already gone through your first round of waiver wires. So some of these guys might not be available. They might be free agents if no one picked them up. But it's funny, I just read an article on waiver wires, and there's some high quality players getting dropped. I mean, there was one league that said Saquon Barkley was dropped in his league. So just keep an eye on that waiver wire, especially kind of that Wednesday morning after the initial everybody drops their players and picks up whoever they want to pick. Because sometimes people make a mistake, or they just think, hey, this guy's garbage. He had a terrible 1 week, and they react and they drop someone. So look for that kind of secondary waiver wire. So we'll get to the question here: Lazard or Marvin Jones on PPR. I'm gonna go. I'd go with Marvin Jones again. If Kenny Galladay's out, he's gonna be the one that's gonna reap the rewards of that. Green Bay, you know that they're gonna go heavy to Devontae Adams. So I think Lazard will kind of get a couple of opportunities, maybe a handful of targets. So he's not going to be a big PPR guy. Go Marvin Jones there for sure. So waiver wires. So to the waiver wire. So who to look for? So the one that everyone probably has picked up already. If they haven't, go seek him out. Obviously, we talked about him. Naheem Hines, the running back for the Colts. If he hasn't been picked up already, he's one that you should go and target. Frank Gore. So Frank Gore, it's a bad matchup, as I said, this week, so I wouldn't play him this week against the 49ers. And in your league, if they didn't kind of thought they saw the matchup this week, so the rest of the guys and girls kind of left them on the side, pick up Frank Gore just as a kind of safety valve if you had an injury, if you need a flex kind of down the road in the next couple of weeks, and see what kind of happens with that Jets offense. The next one's actually an interesting one because you're going to say I'm crazy, but I don't think I am that crazy. So Clyde, not this isn't the pickup. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a huge game, for the Kansas City Chiefs. He played amazing. His rookie debut, it was fantastic. I think he exceeded expectations. The Chiefs look like they have a running game. Everyone's really excited. But it's the Chiefs. And in real life football, forget fantasy for a second, they have bigger plans, right? They're looking to defend their Super Bowl title, and they're going to want to keep this rookie healthy. So, and they're going to blow out a lot of teams. So you look for a guy like Darrell Williams to reap the rewards of that. So the second half of games, when they have the lead, when they're running the ball a lot, they're going to start resting Helaire, and Darrell Williams is going to be the guy that's going to get those types of things. So it's very matchup dependent, but he's the secondary back on the Chiefs, and there is enough offense for the Chiefs that they can support 2 running backs. So watch for that and see if that plays out. Now, if they're in tight games, that'll change this dynamic a little bit. But I'm thinking they're a team that obviously is going to have the leads in a lot of games, and they're going to be running the ball, and they're going to want to have to rest the rookie because they don't want to burn him out. They want to have him healthy for the playoffs because really for them, right, that's their focus, is to get into the playoffs, high seed, hopefully have the one bye, and then obviously try for a second Super Bowl. So watch for him if he's available on your waiver wire. We're going to move to wide receivers. So again, this one was probably picked up as well. Anthony Miller, he had a great week 1 for the Bears. but he's another one who's going to have, right? He's showing to be that number 2 to Allen Robinson, and he's definitely worth a pickup for fantasy. Paris Campbell, the wide receiver for the Colts. Again, maybe I'm overdoing it with the Colts here, but I think the Colts are going to just throw a lot. They're going to, so look for Paris Campbell as that kind of secondary guy to T.Y. Hilton. Defenses are going to focus on Hilton. Hilton has a tendency to get hurt as well. So Paris Campbell's a nice pickup if he hasn't been taken already in your league. And then the last one. So this one kind of surprised me as well from week 1 when I was kind of watching who we should target. Corey Davis. So Corey Davis of the Titans. I thought with Derrick Henry, the Titans were just really going to run the ball a lot. And they came out in week 1 and they threw it all over the place. And again, you have a guy like A.J. Brown where people are going to be focused on him. So look for Corey Davis to be a valuable pickup on the waiver wire. Again, down the road, one of those early pickups that's going to surprise people that you got him so early when they figure out he's actually a viable fantasy player, kind of week 4, week 5. All right, so the last piece of the day, we're going to do our trade targets. So week 1 is great because everybody overreacts, right? If, I've talked to fantasy owners who have teams and it's, this guy's garbage. He's done. 1 week, right? Tom Brady's the worst quarterback in the league right now. That's just real life, not fantasy. He's not, right? It was a bad week. They need to go through some, there's going to be a learning curve there for a new quarterback. So I've already talked to you about Josh Jacobs as someone I traded for this week. I had to give up quite a bit to get him. So these are more guys that you can kind of, I want to say steal because the other people are thinking poorly of them. So we'll start with some running backs. So I mentioned to you Cam Akers. So Cam Akers is one that I think you can get for nothing. If in fact, probably some guys after the first or second week might even drop him. But if you can get him for next to nothing, someone that you're going to drop anyways, look to pick up Cam Akers because, like I said, halfway through this season, you're going to thank me. You're going to thank me for that. The other one is, and I like this. If you have room on your bench, right? There's some leagues where there's a shorter bench. You want to be careful and stay away from that. But if you have a bench where there's a guy or two that you're not sure about anyways, you're thinking about dropping, try to pick up. Now it's going to take you more than a bottom of the bench guy for this guy, but see if you can pick up James Conner. Everyone's really high on Snell right now. Samuel's got some touches in week 1 for the Steelers. Conner got hurt. He didn't play a lot. He has a history of being hurt, like last year as well. He was injured, but it's an ankle injury. Look for him to bounce back kind of week 4, week 5. So if you can steal James Conner, right, when he's healthy and playing, he's a top 10 fantasy wide receiver when healthy, especially in that Steelers offense. So if you can get him for a steal, look to target James Conner. So those are the two that you should try to pick up. Who should you trade away? Adrian Peterson. So for those that are nostalgic, we saw Adrian Peterson, and I told you should start him this week against Green Bay, and you should. But Adrian Peterson is one of those guys that, people were scared to draft, right? The Adrian Petersons, the Frank Gores, right? The older running backs people were hesitant to draft. But then they see him have a big week or two, and they think, it's the old Adrian Peterson, and there's that nostalgia. So he's one that you might be able to trade away and actually get something a little higher than his value for. Again, we're talking long-term. This is not a week-to-week thing. This is a long-term thing that you're trying to do and trade away Adrian Peterson. Quarterback that you should trade away. So I talked about him this week as a sit against Seattle, but again, kind of that nostalgia feel, right? Cam Newton looked really good in week 1. He's not going to look really good in week 2. And if you can trade him and get something back for him, definitely a good pickup is definitely a good trade away is Cam Newton, especially if you can get, something quality for him. Like, I don't think you're going to get another quarterback, but you're probably looking at a wide receiver 2 kind of type of deal for Cam Newton. And so to wide receivers. So who should you be targeting on the trade market for your wide receivers? Mike Williams of the Chargers he's going to be if not already, he's their number 1 wide receiver, but everyone's kind of iffy on that Chargers offense in the passing game, but I think they make a move at the quarterback position earlier than we think, and look for Mike Williams to have a big year. Not everyone's so high on him right now, so look to see if you can steal him. The next one is a really big name, so you're going to have trouble kind of stealing him, but you can based on the week 1 results. People saw what Mike Evans, 1 catch, I think it happened to be for a touchdown, but they saw that Bucs offense, and they're probably a little nervous about what they're going to be this year. Obviously, there's a lot of mouths to feed there. Mike Evans is consistent. Every year he's solid in fantasy, and I think this is another year that he's going to start off slow and then pick it up as the season progresses. So look, if you can, at picking up Mike Evans. So my 2 Mikes there for my wide receivers that you should target and trade. The one you should trade away. So had a huge game in week 1. I told you should sit him in this week against the 49ers. Jamison Crowder, right? If you could trade him right now, right, because his value is so high right now, and get something for him, now's the time to do it. His value will not be higher than it is right now, right? That this just team stinks. Let's be honest. So he's one that for fantasy, he's one that you should try to move and see what you can get for Jamison Crowder. Lastly, tight ends. Okay, so this is one where I've been offered him. I don't need a tight end, however, but I got some offers for George Kittle, right? Everyone thought George Kittle was going to come up and just blow it up, just continue what he did last year, and that obviously hasn't been the case. He got injured, right? I like going after injured players that aren't long, lingering injuries, right? Like I think it's a sprained ankle. He's one that halfway through your fantasy season, heading into your playoffs and championship rounds, right? He's going to be huge, right? He's probably tight end 1 for the season if healthy the whole year. So if you can get George Kittle, you probably have to give up a little bit more for him because it's still George Kittle. But if you have kind of a emotional player in your fantasy leagues, and they're kind of, he's terrible. His week 1 was garbage. He got injured. See if you can steal away George Kittle. Next one is, this is the trade away for tight end. There's probably never going to be a higher ceiling to trade away Dallas Goedert of the Eagles. All right, he had the big week 1 again, but look, at the tight end, it's going to be Zach Ertz, right? Zach Ertz is the tight end for the Philadelphia Eagles. So see if you can get someone to bite on Dallas Goedert. Hello. All right, so that's it for this week's episode of Sports Fluent Fantasy Live. I'll leave the lines open a little bit. I can see a couple more questions coming in, so we'll answer those if we have them. If not, talk to you next week. Stay fluent.